My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Good afternoon and welcome to Dublin City FM, where you're listening to LGBT Life. I'm your host, Mick FitzGerald, and today's programme is going to be given over to a discussion about the LGBT Helpline. And to help me discuss that, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by the National Coordinator of the LGBT Helpline, Paula Fagan. Paula, welcome to LGBT Life.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for having me on.
Yes. Paula, I gather last year was a busy year, but let's just step back a little bit and tell me, the LGBT Helpline, what's the history of it?
Okay. Yeah, sure, Michael. So basically, I suppose there's always been LGBT helplines, or for many, many years there's been LGBT helplines in Ireland, and some of the oldest ones would be, for example, the Dublin Lesbian Line, I think are 40 years in operation this year, and Gay Switcher will be over 40 years. And so I suppose in the middle of the 2000s, around 2006, 2007, the helpline started a conversation together, and they kind of started to think about, well, what if we all joined up in some way that would kind of maximise the support available for people, and kind of, say when I volunteered in Dublin Lesbian Line back in 2001, and a piece of work that I work on a lot, and I think we're getting more understanding now of what the national structure does. So when we train volunteers, for example, when we recruit volunteers, we might be recruiting volunteers in Cork. They'll be physically based in Cork Lesbian Line or Gay Information Cork, but they're also LGBT Helpline volunteers. They'll be answering calls from anywhere in the country. They'll be answering online chats from everywhere. So I suppose we're, in a sense, we're a conduit for making sure that LGBT people and their families have support when they need it.
Yes, it's fascinating because last year during Pride, which was probably a seminal Pride for Dublin, I covered an event that David Norris was talking about the history of LGBT and how it developed. And what was very, very interesting about that is that the helplines almost developed simultaneously as the parties and the discos and so on and so forth. And it shows you that there were right from the very early days that there were two dimensions to LGBT. There was the sublime, but there was also the mundane as well, and the mundane is just getting through the day.
Exactly, and I suppose, absolutely, we would see that all the time, is that where you have a helpline, the helplines are often the catalyst for other things to grow out of those. So certainly Gay Switchboard, some of the lesbian lines would be some of the very early activism, looking at LGBT rights rather than LGBT, that kind of social side of things. So I think they've been very important in the whole LGBT rights movement. But the thing is, I suppose that support is still very important. I suppose that's what we see, is that even with the advancement of rights and obviously things have got better in terms of events and places for people to go and places for people to meet, people still need support and they still need information. And even in the age of, I'm always amazed, in the age of the internet, and where information is quite easy to find, people still ring us or send us a message online and say, look, I'm thinking about going to Cork Pride or whatever, what'll it be like, what's on? So they actually want that conversation. It's not necessary about the information, they can get that themselves, but sometimes it's about having a chat. And
it's an engagement, isn't it? Or
exactly.
a dialogue as opposed to a monologue.
Yeah.
It's very interesting when you look at it. 2001, which is quite recent in some regards, but in technological terms, it's almost a dark age. In 2001 there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there were no Instagrams, there were also no smartphones even. So perhaps for quite a lot of people, they didn't even have a home phone. They were probably having to call you from a call box, which is must have been quite a daunting prospect for a lot of people.
And I suppose the biggest thing was really as well was phone books. You know, that you didn't look up a number online. You had to actually. So people had in Dublin had the Dublin phone book. I lived in Louth. I had the Louth phone book.
Sure.
So, you know, for example, I remember looking up, trying to get the number for Dublin Lesbian, and I heard about it somehow, and I found it eventually. But it was a hard job to find. Do you know what I mean? So that was back in the early 90s. Do you know what I mean? So that has changed hugely. And I suppose that's what the national helpline is trying to do, is to try and meet those new changing needs and changing the way people look for support as well.
Yeah. I just come slightly digress for a second, Paula, because about 20 years ago I watched a documentary, and it was an LGBT documentary, and it was about women in the 50s, and these were a group of Canadian women, and they didn't know really any other lesbians, so they decided they would go to see where lesbians would be most likely to hang out, and of course New York. So they went to New York, and then they thought, well, where would lesbians hang out in New York? And they thought, Times Square. And they went down there as well. No, then they thought, well, where are the lesbians? Because, you know, nobody, I don't know how they expected to identify in those days. Nowadays, of course, we're much better. But and I suspect the same thing was there in that sense of the word, that how did people find out about helplines? Because there were less bars, there were less places to meet, there were even less boring things like coffee shops, or until things like the Hirschfield Centre came along.
That's right.
Yeah. So, what, if I could ask you the personal question, then how did you find out in Louth? You know, you didn't. Did you actually go to the phone book and say, I better look up lesbian, or I better look up?
Yeah, no, I think I went to the library and I got the Dublin phone book. Do you know what I mean? But it was the question of.
Yeah.
I remember the listings, and I think they were listed at the back with charities and
that'd be right.
Support groups. Yeah. So I remember finding it, and I carried the number around for a long time before I rang.
Yeah.
And actually, I was one of those people that rang on a Tuesday, say it wasn't until Thursday. But even the reassurance of hearing the woman's voice, and that was the first person I'd ever known to be lesbian. Like obviously the woman that answered the phone or left the message or whatever. So that was, I understand, I suppose, from that perspective how difficult it can be to make the call, but how immensely helpful it can be even. Yeah.
Well, I think people forget, because in those days we never, we didn't tend to talk about people. You know, either people were, you know, they were so flamboyant, well, they had to be something or other, or they were so, you know, well, that's a woman whose fiance died. You know, in my generation, it was some people whose fiance died in the war, which we always thought was convenient. You know?
Okay.
And you know, they found companionship with each other. I think, in many respects, that's the beauty of what we've actually evolved. Would you accept that?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's come out of our stats is that we tend to get, not so much online now, but to the phone and to our peer support groups. It's a mixture of ages. There's young people as well, but we tend to get people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, into their 60s. And I suppose I'm often struck by that, where people talk about, people of maybe late 40s, 50s, 60s, talk about that thing of not knowing a single other person, having absolutely no visibility. And that was very difficult then, because you really did feel, this is only me. I'm on my own, and the only kind of visible characters were the ones like in Are You Being Served, or something that was very stereotyped.
And not only that, in Ireland, you were also a criminal. True. Particularly if you were male, and it was slightly different for females, but if you were a male and you were people of my age, you were a criminal, you know, which was doubly disconcerting, wasn't it?
Absolutely. So that visibility, I think, is massively important, even though younger people still struggle, and there's different issues for younger people now, but I think the visibility, I think, has really improved, and the referendum was massively important in that. Yeah,
there's a lot more organisations out there now. If we have a look, LGBT, you know, there's LGBT Noise, there's Belong To, there's Glen, there's, you know, there's Tenny, just to name a few. Having looked, even just over the last couple of years, language has become incredibly important. I suspect in the very early days when you were looking it up, it was probably either the gay and lesbian helpline or the lesbian and
That's
gay
right.
helpline, you know.
Yeah.
But bisexual people, well, were really well hidden as a general
Yeah,
rule.
yeah.
Transgender
Still are,
people,
yeah.
well, trans didn't really get into the frame then, and if
No.
it did, it was usually transvestite.
That's right.
Intersex, well, that was for people in medical schools.
Yeah.
You know, so how important then do you think this evolution of language has been over, shall we say, the last 20 or 30 years, Paula?
I think massively important, Michael. It is, language is so important. I think it can't be underestimated, and like we would see, I mean, our stats would say, you know, we get about 16% of calls from people talking about gender identity issues. The volunteers were actually surprised it was so low. They would feel now it's more like, they would have felt it was almost 50-50. And I think certainly the increase in people talking about gender identity, talking about trans, really is around that, is around really the visibility, but also the language. So, you know, now having a trans identity is more talked about. People have the language, not everyone, but certainly there is the, I suppose, more discussion, and it's more in the rhetoric, or in the, you know, discourse, and that's very important, I think.
Sure.
That's,
we tend to think of LGBT as being very much a city sort of based. What we've discovered on this programme is there's quite a large number of LGBT people out there in the country, and I suspect some of that sense of isolation still prevails beyond the pale in that regard. What do you find at the helpline, Paula? Is that sense of isolation perhaps still acute out there?
So yes, absolutely. Like, we get calls and messages from people from every county in Ireland. We would support people a lot who are isolated, rurally isolated. People can be isolated as well, living in a city. It's not to say that people aren't. But I suppose that one of the biggest %60-something of our calls.
About 2 to 1, roughly speaking.
And online it would be different. It's more almost 50-50 actually.
So the medium can be the message in that regard.
Absolutely, and even when we recruit, unlike any other charity in Ireland will tell you that when they recruit volunteers, they get probably 3 times more women applicants than men. We get the opposite.
You get men? That's interesting.
One of our challenges is to try and get more female and female identified volunteers.
Okay.
So
there you are, ladies. You know, women out there. You know, you'll be in great demand.
Exactly. So that's an interesting thing for us, and it would be like, we work a lot with Samaritans as well. We partner with Samaritans, and they would have, they would be interested in that, because they would obviously get a lot more female callers, and also there, you know, there's this idea that perhaps women are better at talking about their problems. So, and maybe it helps for us, the anonymous, confidential nature of the service, that men or people who identify as male feel happier to ring us and to be able to share maybe their deepest worries and concerns, you know. So in terms of the age demographics then, as you said, like, we're finding that it's, the younger people want to actually get support and information online. So we were delighted this year to get funding to launch an online chat service.
Excellent.
Which is an instant messaging service. So it's essentially, you're talking live with one of our volunteers, but it's on our website, lgbt.ie, and that's proven massively popular with younger people. So at least a third of the people accessing that support are under 18.
Excellent.
Yeah.
How does it work? Looking at geography, you've got shall we say, facilities around the country. How does it break down in that sense? Is it proportionately higher in the cities, or is it, you know, are you getting unexpected results from, say, perhaps Cork or elsewhere?
Yeah, so I suppose that's our aim, is that we, over the last 2 years and going on to the next couple of years, we're trying to base ourselves in to try and help communities build the support in the local community. So so we are in the cities. We have helplines in Dublin City and Cork City, but we're also and Galway as well. We just opened last year. But I suppose in Mayo, for example, we would be getting more into the rural communities. The same in Kerry, and we're hoping to open a helpline in the Midlands now this year, because we can see from the map, I suppose, where there's gaps. And what that allows us to do then is to try and build other supports as well as helpline. We also then try and build up the volunteers' capacity to deliver to stuff like peer support groups and that kind of thing.
And is it always what I would call directional in that sense of the word? If somebody rings up and says, I've got an issue, or are you getting it, what I found was very common within Tenny was parents were ringing up and parents were contacting. How does what's your experience in that regard?
Yeah, so I mean, we're never directional in the sense of we don't ever give advice or anything like that. So we're really about offering a listening ear and support. We get a lot of the second biggest category of calls we get are around family and relationship problems or issues. So almost 99% of the time, I would say, around a family member ringing will be a parent, and they tend to be coming from a supportive frame of mind.
Good. Yeah.
By making the call, it almost indicates how supportive they are, but they're a lot of the time they need help with language, with dealing with, I suppose, what they've heard and coming to terms with maybe they had one perception of their child and now it's different, or even just that thing of being able to talk without judgment, having someone who they know is LGBT, being able to talk to them and say, well, look, what would be how do you think I should go about this? And we'll help them look at the options and talk about language and talk about, just help them talk through their worries, really, is what we do.
Sometimes women are reluctant to talk to men and vice versa. How does that work out? If somebody rings in, would they be put to the first person operator that was available, or can they say, I only really want to discuss this issue? For instance, a lesbian usually would only want to discuss it with a woman, which is perfectly understandable.
Exactly.
How does that work out then?
So the aim, and this is the advantage of the service, is that we have more volunteers available. So in theory, the person can ring in, and people do. They often ring in and they say, like, I've taken a call recently and the person was saying, I only want to speak to a male volunteer. We would always say in the first instance, look, we're all trained, we're all LGBT, can I help you? If there's no one else available.
Sure,
If there is another volunteer available, we'll go with the person's wishes. We're always directed by the caller or the chatter. But that isn't always possible, but where we can, we do, and that's the beauty of the phone network, I suppose, is that we can see, well, okay, Jane is in Cork, I can just hold the line and we can patch them through. So we do that where we can, but as I say, we're always trying to have an underrepresented representation of women volunteers at the moment. We're building that up, but so it's not always possible, that's our I suppose, desire is to do that.
And as Ireland gets more diverse in its population and its culture, and as we say, its cultural fabric, are we getting more calls through from, shall we say, non-natives? And how much of a challenge is that for a small organisation like yourselves?
Yes, I mean, one of the challenges actually from the online, since we launched it, is that we're getting a lot of messages from people in countries where there's very difficult restrictive environments. So that's something actually we have to talk about internally. Is at the moment we're trying to support those people as much as we can, but that's quite minimal. So that's a challenge actually that we had unexpected.
So it's actually almost an international helpline these days. Yes.
But given there was, we do have scarce resources, so we have to try and do what we can. But so that's something that actually I think is an issue that we will talk about going forward. In terms of people who are living in Ireland, yes, we get a range. We get all sorts of nationalities and ethnicities that ring us. It's not dissimilar, I suppose, to the things that other people are dealing with. I mean, religion would often be a factor
course.
in terms of people coming to terms with their sexuality or gender identity, and that's something that we often talk about, or how their family, whatever culture they're from or religion that they practice, can be a very difficult, often be a barrier for
Yep.
people.
And tell me then, Paula, is there some form of protocol that you would have in place of what I would call an escalation process? I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody rings up and says, I want a bit of information, that's not that difficult, but not all problems are simple.
Yeah.
So how would you deal with that as an organisation?
So I suppose we are essentially a listening service, and we do have information as well. So we always try and support somebody in the first instance. So we don't want anyone to ring us and then be just told really quickly, well, we can't help you, you need to go somewhere else. So we'd always listen, because I think there's a huge power in listening. And that's what we would find, is that often, regardless of how complex people's issues are, if they can be heard and they can be listened to, then that can be a huge help. As well, I suppose we always try and assist people to look at the options for themselves. So often people are the experts in their own lives. They just need a chance to talk it through in a non-judgmental way. So I would always say that to volunteers, actually, when we're doing training, is that actually listening is the key. It doesn't, because you can get really complex calls. Obviously we have a lot of information. We have a database that volunteers are on while they're actually taking calls, so they can look up, you know, there's certain things that we don't obviously do. We're not a counselling service. If people are a risk to themselves or someone else, we will escalate that type of a call. But that is in the very rare circumstance. Most people actually listening, having someone to listen to them is key, and having someone that maybe is trained and knows the type of supports that are available can be a huge help.
Yeah, and when I was talking to earlier this year, when I was talking to our mutual friend Moninia Griffith, she was saying their over at Belong To, their calls had increased dramatically since the 22nd of May. Has your experience been similar?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from a very positive point of view is that it raised, I suppose, people's expectations and also people's courage, and more people are getting in touch to say, look, I haven't talked about this before, but I feel like now I want to be a bit more open about my life or whatever. And also I think what's been massive in the referendum is that people actually have tangible evidence of who is supportive in their family and who isn't. So that's a huge benchmark for people now. They ring us and they go, we're talking through who they might talk to, who might be support to them, and they can say, well, actually, cousin Jenny was really... Yeah, and so suddenly, I suppose it really helped in that is that the secrecy
to identify
was lifted.
the support.
Yeah.
Paula, we're going to run out of time, but I want to get to the important bit. People listening, particularly women, and thinking that's a terrific service. That's a really good idea. How can they get in touch and perhaps find out some more information about volunteering with you? Okay,
so we always look for volunteers. We're looking for volunteers, particularly in Dublin, Kilkenny, and Mayo at the moment. So if they go on to lgbt.ie, they'll see there on our volunteering section how you can apply, what positions are open, and just our criteria. And really the only two things that we ask is that people are LGBT identified themselves, and also that they have the capacity to listen. And all the everything else we can train you in.
So, and what would they be expected to commit to?
I understand. So they have to commit to the training, and then they commit to 6 hours per month. We like people to stay for at least 2 years if they can. So 6 hours per month is not
That's not demanding. Paul, unfortunately we run out of time, but we would always be delighted to have yourselves and the LGBT helpline back again. As I say, unfortunately that's the end of today's LGBT Life. I want to thank Heather Henn for doing such a fabulous job out there on the mixing desk.
My world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am.